The Louisville basketball team picked up 2 victories down in the Bahamas this week, but on today's episode of the show, we're explaining how the team showed what they needed to make this a successful trip beyond the box score. All that and more on today's episode of Locked On Louisville.
You are Locked On Louisville, your daily podcast on the Louisville Cardinals. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Card Nation, what is going on, everyone? Welcome into this Thursday evening episode of the Locked On Louisville podcast. I'm your host, Dalton Pence. Today's episode brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off of your first purchase. Terms apply. As always, I want to personally thank you all for making us your first listen of the day. Just a reminder, the Locked On Louisville podcast, free and available on all streaming services 5 days a week, your team every day. The Louisville men's basketball program had a successful preseason trip to the Bahamas, 2 blowout victories, but it wasn't so much the margin of victory for me, but what they showed throughout the games. And we'll explain a little bit about what I mean here coming up shortly. We'll identify who I believe the 3 most valuable players, the 3 best players for the Cardinals over this 2-game stint were, and then we'll explain how the Cardinals' depth will be a strength this season. Louisville concluded their brief 2-game stint down in the Bahamas Summer Hoops League with a 111-71 victory over the University of Calgary Dinos. Both of the games were heavy blowouts in favor of Pat Kelsey's squad, and it was always supposed to be that way. Louisville was supposed to beat the Bahamas select team. They were supposed to beat the University of Calgary. But nonetheless, this was our first look at a Pat Kelsey-led team in his tenure as the head coach of the Louisville Cardinals. And we spoke after the first game about how there were a ton of positives to take away from their performance. Now, it was the first performance of the year, exhibition, a couple months before the season, so you couldn't put too much significance into the game, and you couldn't, focus too much on the areas of improvement. Sort of the same thing with this second performance, but more of the same from the Cardinals. You saw the passion from the very beginning, the urgency, the team's cohesiveness on both ends of the court. Overall, the performance on Thursday just sort of solidified the overall performances from the week. This was a successful trip for the men's basketball program. If you remember, if you listen to the show, and if you do, I appreciate. Thank you all for making Locked On Louisville your first listen of the day. As I had acknowledged at the beginning of the show, there were 3 things that I was hoping to see. Number 1, constant energy and effort. That alone was shown from the very beginning of the first game to the end of the first game, the very beginning of the second game to the end of the second game. It was a breath of fresh air. It was relieving to see if you are a Cardinals fan. This quote by Pat Kelsey, shout out to Eric Crawford for tweeting this out. This is the quote of the day, the quote of the week. Because as much as it might be relieving to have seen that energy, Pat Kelsey said this: "We're not going to throw parades because we dive for loose balls and crash the glass. That's the expectation." How the tone, how the rhetoric has completely done a 180 from earlier in 2024. And I have said on this show that I'm not really a fan of continually bringing up the past coaching regime, but I truly believe that if you are a Division I coach, if you're a coach in general, your players will, let me say, your passion will trickle down. The effort, the energy, the urgency that you display and that you teach your players will pay off dividends, and your team will start to adopt that level of culture. That is a huge that's a huge component of culture. And I think that it is on the coach to be able to instill that within a program. To hear that from the coach and to see it on the court was, once again, I keep coming back to this term, it was a breath of fresh air. It was awesome to see the team crashing the glass on both ends of the court. the team focusing and communicating on defense, and overall just not taking many plays off. And there were certain times in the second half where, you were up by a lot of points. So instinctively, you're going to sort of take your foot off the gas a little bit. But if they did, they didn't do it for long. Felt like Louisville kept trying to push the issue all game long, for at least for the vast majority of it. So the first portion, check. Energy and effort. Right off the bat, that's what you wanted to see. Now, the end results matter and they don't at the same time. Like, the fact that you won both games by blowouts really doesn't matter in the grand scheme of things. It's more so how you got there. Now, of course, you could have, quote unquote, played good and play hard, and if you would have lost, I think that people were singing a different tune, and rightfully so. However, you didn't lose. You handled business the way that you were supposed to. So it was about how you got there. It was more so the process rather than the end result. And what I saw on the court was 13 guys, or technically 11 guys, 11 scholarship guys with 2 of them redshirting, 11 players that looked like they'd been playing together much longer than they have. Like, if you would have not known anything about this Louisville team and then you would have watched the Cardinals play, chances are you wouldn't have been able to pick up the fact that none of these players played for the Cardinals last year. These are 11 new players, a brand new team. And there was a level of cohesiveness and chemistry on the offensive and defensive ends. A ton of ball movement with and without the ball on offense, getting open shots, making the extra pass. 38 assists in that first game was absolutely incredible. They had 22 this time around, so not as great of a shooting night, but still respectable. They shot 31 threes in the second game against Calgary, made 12 of them for a 39% clip, 52% from the field. So as fast-paced as this offense has been playing, they got some highly effective shots, some good looks, and capitalized on them. They made the most out of their opportunities. They out-rebounded Calgary 53-25, which was definitely a good statistic. They forced 13 turnovers. Calgary had a negative assist-to-turnover ratio, which is really solid. And Louisville had 12 turnovers. Now, they do need to be better in that regard. They have to be better in terms of not turning the ball over, but it is what it is. With more possessions, you're going to see some more turnovers. That's just sort of the nature of the scheme that you're playing. But offensively, we saw a lot of great things. Now, again, take things with a grain of salt, because I'll say it once, I'll say it again. The level of competition needs to be acknowledged. These were 2 teams that respectable opponents, but definitely 2 squads that were inferior in talent, and Louisville should have beat handedly. And they did. It was more so the process. This didn't really look like a team that had just started playing together just a month or 2 ago. Now, understandably, it's not where it needs to be. Pat Kelsey acknowledged that, hey, look, we are a far ways away from being a good team, but we will be a good team. So I like the message there. Defensively was probably where I was the most impressed. I always feel like it's harder to pick up defensive scheme. And what I saw was a team that really put an emphasis on individual defense. I mean, you have multiple point of attack defenders: Chucky Hepburn, Abubakar Traore, Javon Hadley, Kasean Pryor, you name it. Noah Waterman, really good defense. Frank Anselm Ebay, James Scott, the list goes on. I felt like you saw really good defense from the whole team. You saw communication. You saw players switching and doing so effectively. Yes, they could have done a little bit better on closing out shooters. They were a little bit too physical at times, and they drawed more fouls. Now, admittedly, it was a very frequent whistle. I thought that they didn't really allow a ton of contact, but it is what it is. Nonetheless, it was a really good defensive performance. They didn't let their opponents score a ton of points. They, made shots really tough. I mean, Calgary shot 30% from the field, 31% from the field. Didn't really get much on the offensive glass. Louisville doubled them in rebounds, and Calgary got 16 of their points from the free throw line. So Louisville did a good job of getting to the line as well. 25 of 33, just using like a better, more athleticism in this game to, just make their point known and get to the rim. Overall, I would caution fans to take too much away from this game, but I also would caution you to completely overlook and brush these wins off. They're significant in the notion of this is the first time this team has played together against external competition. They looked good. They got 2 blowout victories. They looked cohesive on offense. They did what they needed to do to be effective on defense. And it seemed like they laid the foundation for what is set to be a possibly very solid season for the Cardinals. Now, at the end of the day, these were 2 teams that you were supposed to beat, and you did. But it's still early. It's a preseason trip for a reason. They don't award anything for preseason trips once you get to the regular season. So it's a good building block for, the rest of the offseason as we get into the preseason ahead of that tip-off on November 4th against Morehead State. Ultimately, I was really satisfied. I feel like it was as successful of a preseason trip as it possibly could have been for the men's basketball team. But who stood out the most? I'm going to identify who my 3 MVPs were from this past week on the next episode of Locked On Louisville. Today's episode of the show is brought to you by Gametime. Look, I love going to sporting events. I have used Gametime for college football, college basketball, NBA, even concerts. But I've yet to use them for MLB. But I definitely will be when the Houston Astros take on the Cincinnati Reds up in Cincinnati, up I-71 North on the Labor Day week. And the reason I'm going with Gametime is because when you download the app, what's understood does not need to be explained. All of the features that they have, from the all-in pricing to where you can toggle the feature that will show you the total upfront with no surprise fees at checkout. You get a panoramic view from your seat in the app before you buy. And there's always the lowest price guarantee, which means that if you find tickets in the same section and row for less, Gametime will credit you 110% of the difference. Do yourself a favor. Take the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last-minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. Also, before we get into the next segment, want to once again reiterate that you need to, if you haven't already, start tuning in to Locked On Sports Today. It's a free 24/7 sports streaming channel programmed for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all the screaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't-miss analysis, opinions, and news, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, covering your team every day. And continuing on along in this second segment of the Thursday evening edition of the Locked On Louisville podcast. Once again, thank you all for making us your first listen of the day. Just a reminder, Locked On Louisville free and available on all streaming services 5 days a week. Your team every day. This is a very interesting hypothetical discussion because you could go a couple different ways with this. And I want to hear from you all. Who are your 3 MVPs for the Cardinals in the brief 2-game Bahamas Summer Hoops League? I have 3 players that the first 2, in my opinion, were pretty clear. The third one I went back and forth on. The number one, if you chose the MVP of the 2 games, it would be Kasean Pryor. Kasean Pryor was fantastic in both games, shot the ball really well, played really good perimeter defense. In that first game, 17 points on 6 of 9 shooting, 4 of 7 from 3. He started the tone early for the Cardinals, 3 of 4 from deep. He had 3 rebounds and I believe 3 steals and 1 block to his name in that first game. And then he answered it with a team high, 20 points. He was 6 of 8 from the field, 2 of 4 from the 3-point line, 6 of 8 from the charity stripe. He had 5 rebounds. Overall, was Louisville's Swiss Army knife on the court. If he's hitting those shots at a high level from behind the arc, he is a walking mismatch. Offensively, I thought that he executed his role really well. He didn't really force the issue. He took really effective and efficient shots, and he knocked down those shots. He was Louisville's leading scorer of this 2-game series. He played really, really good defense, was probably the best defender in terms of, individual guarding throughout the first 2 games. Just overall, really solid. I don't really think that there was one aspect. Maybe he was too physical at times when it comes to guarding, but it is what it is. I'd rather you have that physicality that you play with. So Kasean Pryor was, for me, the clear-cut MVP of this classic. Both games, he was extremely effective on each end, and he affected the game more than just the box score. So Kasean Pryor gets that first MVP vote for me, and I think that he is going to be a walking mismatch for teams all season long. The second one was also not that hard for me to determine. Javon Hadley gets this nod. He led the team with He led the team with 18 points in the first game, was 8 of 10 from the field, 2 of 2 from behind the arc. He had 6 assists to go. 6 rebounds. Gosh, I can't read the own spreadsheet that I'm looking at. 6 rebounds and 2 assists, was effective on that end, caught the ball a lot on the elbow at the free throw line and really distributed outside of that. Didn't really force the issue, but just was the glue guy that Louisville needed on that end, and he created his own offense. Solid three-point shooting, was 100% from the field, and was able to take it to the rim and finish effectively. Defensively, great point of attack defender, put that on full display. Versatile, switchable defender, guarded multiple positions on Tuesday evening, and was arguably Louisville's best player. He followed that up with another really solid performance. He had 13 points on Thursday, 4 of 8 from the field, 1 of 3 from 3, and 4 of 6 from behind the arc. He also had 8 rebounds to go along with that, and once again showed that he might not be Louisville's number 1 scoring option, but he can definitely hold his own and be able to score in double figures. Also to be able to be Louisville's glue guy on both ends of the court. That's the main thing for me is all offseason, I feel like I've been mentioning that him and Abubakar Traore were going to be the glue guys for Louisville, guys that can just flat out do it all. There's not really one aspect of their game outside of maybe perimeter shooting that they're lacking, although Hadley really hasn't shown that that is to be the case. More so, that's something that Traore struggles with. But nonetheless, Hadley did everything that I was hoping that he would show that he could do. And you could tell that veteran leadership. He started for a tournament team, played the majority of minutes at Colorado last season for a reason. Played over 30 minutes a game because he affects the game in almost every metric that can be quantified. So really excited about what he showed and what he brought to each game. Really solid offense. And I think he mentioned that, he doesn't try to force the issue on offense. He lets it come to him and picks and chooses where he decides to push the issue and try to score the basketball. And he made really good decisions. I think that it's incredibly dangerous for opposing teams to allow Hadley to get access to the middle of the half court, at the free throw line to catch the ball, because he's such a willing and able passer. And he has a really good understanding of half-court offense, moves well without the ball, and can set those screens. And he's also really solid posting up players down in the paint. That's something that we talked about. So Hadley was the number 2 MVP for me. Number 3, I went back and forth. I went back and forth with guys like Corin Johnson, even players like Kenai Ruths was up there to be discussed. Ruths didn't really have that great of a second game, although he did have 11 rebounds. I thought that was solid. Chucky Hepburn was solid outside of scoring the basketball. Terrence Edwards Jr. scored in double figures in both games. I went with Abubakar Traore. In that first game, he scored 11 points, had 7 rebounds, and 6 assists. In the second game, 8 points, 7 rebounds, 4 assists. in that first game, looking back on it, he had, I think, one block. It was that really explosive block at the sort of toward the end of the first half. Everybody's like, "Ooh, okay." Traore is the ultimate glue guy. This season, he's probably not going to be the best three-point shooter. I would imagine and probably go out on a limb to suggest he doesn't take probably more than 15 threes this season. Even that might be too high. But everything else he does so well. He understands his role on offense, which is to sort of be that secondary pick and roll, screen man, and he's able to take the ball on the baseline and get to the rim. He's really athletic, really solid in transition, and uses that athleticism and also that willingness to rebound around the basket to get some of his offense. Traore is a dog. Probably you could say that for a lot of players on this team, and rightfully so. But the way that he affected the game when it comes to rebounding the ball, he was instrumental in creating those opportunities for his teammates. I am a huge fan of glue guys. I think that those guys whose impact spans well beyond the box score do not get the credit that they deserve. That's not the case for the Locked On Louisville podcast. Glue guys will always get the credit they deserve on this show, and Traore is getting that credit. Again, multiple worthy players to receive this honor, but Traore is the third MVP for me in this 2-game series. Let me know who your all 3 MVPs are in the comments below. But if that conversation that we just had tells you anything, it's that depth is going to be a real strength for the Cardinals this season. We'll break it down a little bit more in the final segment. Today's episode of the show also brought to you by eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. The formula for winning championships is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. And with over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you always find exactly what you need, or you get your money back. Because with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time, or you get your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fits only available to U.S. customers. And into the final segment of this Thursday evening episode of the Locked On Louisville podcast. Depth will be a key strength for this team this season. We got to see a little bit of that. Now, granted, that this is not a new narrative. This narrative is one that has been talked about ever since the roster was concluded, that Pat Kelsey has so much depth. Until you really see it in action, you can't really say for sure, and we obviously aren't into the season, but Louisville got so much contribution from the entire roster. You look at that first game, I think it was, I almost think it was 7 players in double figures scoring. They scored 111 points. I didn't realize that. They scored 111 in both games. That's pretty neat. They had 7 players in double figures. That's really, really solid. In the second game, not as much. They had 5 guys in double figures, although Rain Smith flirted with 9. Chucky Hepburn had 8. Abubakar Traore had 8. James Scott had 8. So you had guys that were pretty much right on the cusp of getting there. Noah Waterman played his first game on Thursday. He had 10 points, 4 rebounds, and looked really good defensively. Understand that you kind of got a little glimpse of what the pace is going to resemble this upcoming season. And I think that you can't really use this as the guideline, but you can believe that a lot of the inspiration on subs is going to be based upon what you saw this week. Louisville's going to sub often all throughout games. They're going to keep guys fresh. You're going to see multiple guys average. You're going to see some players get over 30 minutes a game and other guys average in the 20s. It really just depends on who the hot hand is. We're going to wait to see what the rotations look like, because at this time, I think that Pat Kelsey's just trying out a couple different things. Like the starting lineup probably won't be, or it might not be what you would expect it to be coming up here in a couple months, because Kelsey even said that judging based upon who plays the best in practice will dictate who starts in the Bahamas series. So you can't really put too much stock into everything, but there's a lot of inspiration that can be taken from this, because you have multiple different guys that can score in double figures. Now, I think that it would be beneficial to have like a go-to score, because when games get close and you get to crunch time and you need a go-to bucket, you sort of has you have a designated guy that you believe that to be, whether it is Kasean Pryor, whether it is Terrence Edwards Jr., Corin Johnson, the list goes on. There's going to be a lot of players that are going to flirt with averaging double-digit scoring. Now, is Louisville going to score 111 every game? No, they're not. I hope they do. That'd be pretty neat. High-octane offense, to say the least. But moving forward into the season, it's pretty obvious that depth will be a strength. You wonder whether or not that this pace of play is sustainable at this level. If you have the quality depth, I believe that it is. So you have the quality depth. You have 11 guys that can give you really good minutes. And even you saw, Kenai Roots, I think, is going to have a really good freshman campaign. James Scott, I think, is scratching the surface of the potential that he can reach in terms of his ceiling. Guys like Rain Smith, Noah Waterman, even Frank Anselm eBay. I'm really intrigued to see what his role is going to be. He had 4 blocks in that game against the Bahamas. Limited amount of action. I don't think he's going to be a 20-minute per night type player, but I do think he's going to at least get a little bit more playing time than I personally had allocated for him to get in my mind when I was sort of breaking down the minutes distribution. I think Ansel Amibe is going to be that situational guy off the bench if someone gets in foul trouble, if injuries occur, knock on wood, hopefully they do not, or if Louisville is in a blowout, hopefully it's for the better, not for the worse. So depth will be a key strength for this team. I'm really intrigued to see what the rotation looks like. It ends up being what that early initial rotation is, because you're going to be playing Morehead State, which, I mean, I would say is a better team than the University of Calgary in the Bahamas. You would assume so. I mean, they did make the NCAA tournament last year. Yes, Preston Spradlin has moved on to James Madison, but again, going to be a pretty decent level of opposition. But nonetheless, we will see how that turns out. That is going to wrap up this Thursday evening episode of the show. Everyone have a great day. We'll see you right back here